Nat Geo, in terms of a brand, what I think has been really exciting for me about it over the last few years is how it's really sort of pinned in and really focused on really trying to tackle some of these really big issues in a way that I think is far more catalysing and engaging than it's done before. And seeing the work that Creature Media does through Nat Geo Kids magazine, I think it's extraordinarily powerful in terms of giving children positive messages about how we can be the change we want to see, right? It's interesting seeing, let's see if we can get this working. It's interesting seeing the IPBES report that came out, the United Nations report on extinction of species around the world, where it's estimated that 1 million species are at risk of extinction. And in there, they sort of talk about 7 different points about how actually you can create that change. And number one, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from a group of scientists, is that we need a positive vision of a better life in the future, right? That's the number one thing they talk about. Can I see a show of hands for people who agree with the motivations of Extinction Rebellion on the streets of London? Okay, so the majority of people. Who agrees with all their tactics? Okay, so about maybe a third of people. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's really easy for people to pick on some of the individual tactics, but if I was to make a critique of Extinction Rebellion, who I wholeheartedly support, like if anything, I feel very frustrated that it's taken decades to get to that point of anger, really. And I think that the nature conservation community has some responsibility to play in that, in not involving a social agenda in terms of unions and a people-centred approach. But my one critique of them, which I think that they're going to probably address in the near future, hopefully, is that while they are telling the truth about the fear that we need to face and ringing that alarm bell, they are currently failing to show us that future or what that better life could look like. But the really exciting thing for me around that is that actually there are examples around the world where that better life already exists, right? So as an example, Friends of the Earth at the moment are pushing for the idea of having double tree canopy cover in the UK as a way of reversing the extinction of, well, not reversing the extinction of species, but reversing the decline of species and capturing carbon. Actually, you just look south of London to the Surrey Hills, and you already have that amount of tree canopy cover. And you can already see that sort of diverse landscape you could imagine that the whole of Britain could maybe look like in the future. And for me, I'm not from Surrey, but I think Surrey is one of the most beautiful counties in the country, right? So I think that there are examples around the world, politically, behaviourally, in terms of communities, where we can see these solutions already playing out. What I'm going to talk to you about today is this sort of campaign I started a few years ago now around making London a national park city. Has anyone heard of this campaign before today? Okay, that's sort of like 80% of people. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this idea, which I hope is a contribution towards a vision for what a better life could be like for some people. But before that, I want to tell you just a small about my work as a Nat Geo Explorer and as an explorer. So my background is I'm a parent. I've got a 15-year-old who's super rebellious at the moment, which is fun. I'm a former geography teacher. I've got a geography degree. I've done with National Geographic over 150 micro-adventures across the UK. With another project with Nat Geo and Cisco, I walked across all the national parks and all the cities in the UK, where a mind-reading device to see how my brain reacted to different kinds of environments. I've travelled the country extensively, right? And I came to realise about sort of 3 years ago that although I had travelled the country extensively, that I didn't really know what the country looks like. And that's because actually the country's a pretty big place. To be honest, if I'm honest, I don't really have a very good sense of proportion of my own body, let alone like this whole island. And the narrative quite often, of especially the right-wing press, is this idea that this island of ours is full, right? There's no space for refugees, there's no space for migrants, there's no space to be in the European Union, controversial point maybe, there's no space for more wildlife, there's no space for affordable housing, you know? And in the US, there's a very similar narrative where President Trump was giving a speech very, very recently, and he was sort of saying, you know, the system's full, there's no more space for migrants. But then he went further, he pushed further, and he said, actually, no, we are full, we are geographically full, there's no more physical space for people. I hope this is going to do this the whole time, that'd be a shame. And you know, I think this is a really big problem, because if people don't have a sense of what our landscape, our geography is like, then how can we come up with proportionate solutions? So I was thinking about this, and I got together with Friends of the Earth, and we ran a poll and found through YouGov that 1 in 3 people in Britain think that over half the country is built on. Okay, so 1 in 3 people think that over half the country is built on. I was with some kids in Reading yesterday, and these kids were basically saying they think that 60%, 80% of like the country is built on. So what I decided to do, this is going to be a problem, isn't it? I can just see it's going to be a problem. So what I decided to do is, with try and make this work, is make a short film where in this short film, every 1 second of the film is 1% of what the country looks like from above. If it carries on blinking, I'll just do the presentation without it. We'll try and make this film work. Ooh. I think they make it. Sorry, everyone. No. Okay, do you know what? I'm going to talk you through it. Why not? Just unplug this. Yeah, so essentially it's Benjamin, Zeph and I talking over it, which is cool, and we're going to go on a walk across the United Kingdom to see what it really looks like. So this is the UK in 100 seconds. So the first 22 kinds of land that you see in the UK are basically gone in the blink of an eye, right? They take a very, very different space, even some of them that are quite big in our imaginations. Houses and gardens occupy just 5% of the United Kingdom, just 5%. Grasslands cover about 7% of the UK. Moors, 8%. And then I find peat bogs, 9%, absolutely amazing. I mean, this almost looks like Britain from the air, right? Like, absolutely stunningly beautiful. Woods, between 10 and 13%. In this film, we say it's 10%. That's like the lower sort of edge of it. Deciduous woodland, coniferous woodland. So arable land, crops take up 27% of the United Kingdom. About half of all those crops that you see are fed to livestock. Okay, so when you fly over the UK or go to the countryside, imagine that half of those crops are fed to livestock. And so we have, the last one was wheat, this is barley in right proportions, this is rapeseed, beans, corn, oats, and then finally vegetables, a very, very small amount, less than 2% of the UK. Pastures occupy 28% of the United Kingdom. So we're in the midst of this moment where we are in an ecological crisis with 1 in 10 species in the UK at risk of extinction. We're in a moment of, a crisis in terms of the climate, where we need to rapidly store carbon and make our country more resilient to climate change. We're at a moment where we have a housing crisis, a mental health crisis. We have all these crises, but actually even the unlocking of a relatively small amount of space by having a little bit less milk and cheese could actually have quite transformative impacts on all kinds of wildlife and people in this country. So I think it's interesting when you begin to see the UK like that. Actually, I think it challenges people's notions of how we manage ourselves and our country. And actually what I'd quite like to do next is do the same film but for Earth, right? Because I think no one knows what Britain looks like, and to be honest, I don't think anyone knows what Earth looks like either. Because you only ever see bits of it, or it's in a sterile graph or something like that. So I'm interested in how people think about places, and how people's ideas about places are quite often a bit sort of confused maybe. So a few years ago, actually, I was doing a project with National Geographic. I was doing 125 adventures across the UK with my son, who was like 10 at the time. And I visited all of the UK's inspiring, distinctive, remarkable, beautiful national parks in a relatively short period of time. And actually, I grew up in an army family, being dragged through national parks in various different places around the world. So I've got a strong relationship with national parks. And when people think of them, they often think of places like this. So this is Dartmoor National Park, or this is Banff National Park in Canada. People often think of these big, expansive environments that are super exciting, awesome, maybe they might have a sense of fear from them, but I think these particular values that I've described there are particularly human-centric values of national parks, whereas national parks are actually about other things as well. And when you look at the family of protected areas and national parks around the world, what you'll see across the terrestrial environment is they represent every major type of recognised landscape and habitat by the United Nations, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the European Union, including deserts, coral reefs, mountains, moorlands, glaciers, everything you can imagine, apart from one, which is the world's fastest growing habitat, which is urban areas, right? And urban areas are where most people are, and actually a bit weirdly for some people, compared to the monoculture and herbicides and pesticides and poaching and encroachment that you get within the countryside, often some of these towns and cities are better for wildlife, some species of wildlife, than the surrounding countryside. So I began to wonder why it was we wouldn't include a major city or urban area within the family of national parks around the world. And I'm going to give you 5 key reasons for this. From a nature conservation point of view, I could come from a child health, urban resilience, all kinds of different angles, but I'm going to come at it purely from the nature conservation angle today. And hopefully, if you're not with me so far on this argument, these 5 points will give you enough of an aha moment to be with me. So firstly, urban life is not worth less than rural life. Okay, in my view, urban peregrine falcons and Tate Modern and up in Westminster aren't worth less than those in the Peak District or Yosemite National Parks. And actually with our urban canyons and our prolific parakeets and pigeons, actually London has got more breeding pairs of peregrine falcons than Yosemite or the Peak District National Parks. London could be better for wildlife, but actually some species thrive. Certainly they're not worth less. Urban life is not worth less. Secondly, people deserve great habitats. You know, we share this city with about 15,000 other species of life, right? Making it arguably the most biologically diverse region of the United Kingdom. So we're familiar with the idea that orangutans need clean air and clean water and they need trees. And of course they do. But guess what? Homo sapiens do too, and so do all the other species that we share the city with. Next, cities are really enjoyable. So I'm an explorer, right? I love rainforests, love deserts, love glaciers, love all these things. But actually, I love hiking through London just as much, right? Super accessible, super porous, 300 cultures. Each culture has however many cuisines underneath it, hundreds of villages, loads of history, loads of species. If you've not walked the Capital Ring or the London Loop or the Thames Footpath, go and do those things. It is just as interesting as those other environments, just different, not worth less. Next up, really vitally, in terms of positivity around this, cities are where most people in the world are. The world's population is going to double. Most of those people are going to be in cities, right? And this is where people have power, okay? So most people, when they go out on adventures or go walking, don't go more than a few kilometres from their home, if at all, okay? So we've got to bring nature and these relationships to people where they are, rather than thinking that they're going to get out to these other environments. But really crucially as well, in terms of people's ability to have agency over land, you know, most people aren't going to become a scientist working in Indonesia with like some charismatic species, right? But nearly everybody has the power to make a flower pot or a balcony or a rooftop or a street go wild. Everyone's got the power probably to pull up a paving slab and let nature restore, often without even having to do anything because nature will restore itself. And it's not only that people have power to create life, not just protect life in cities, which is different to people's relationship with national parks, where predominantly consumers those environments, right? But that it is where consumers are, it's where voters are, it's where decision makers are. So actually we need to bring this to the heart of people in cities and not exclude them from the conversations. Finally, from the climate justice, climate change perspective, actually in terms of caring for people, elderly people, an ageing population, in terms of the distribution of resources, we actually need cities to be denser with more people being cared for more effectively in cities. It's not effective to have large numbers of people spread over large areas, you know, needing to burn carbon and energy to get people around. So you want denser cities, but then you need the public spaces and green spaces in those cities to be better because people are living in that denser city. So with all that in mind, I asked a question a while back, could London become a national park? And to many people it might sound a ridiculous idea because they have a very concrete experience of the city. You know, you're a commuter or you're a child or you're a visitor to London, you arrive in King's Cross, you go to a museum somewhere, you go through the tube, it's all stressful and you just see concrete. The reality is that most of London isn't roads, most of London isn't buildings. Actually, nearly half of London is physically green. If every Londoner, on average, was to make 1 square metre of London green or blue, then we'd make the majority of the city green and blue. Okay, and what that would do is it would increase wildlife, increase the diversity of wildlife, it improve our resilience to climate change in terms of decreasing temperatures in the summer, increasing temperatures in the winter. About 100,000 homes in London are at risk of flooding, it would reduce flood risk, like all these different benefits. And that is something that, you know, the target of making the majority of London physically green, one of our targets, isn't something that the mayor or a business or a private citizen can do on their own, but actually everyone working together is completely possible. So I find this map really inspiring of London because it represents about 2,000 years of history of top-down policy from, for example, the City of London creating giant commons, through to the Royal Parks, through the GLA, doing top-down policy to protect green spaces. And despite the narrative we have about the threats to public and green spaces, yes, that's happening, that nibbling is happening, but for the most part, we're very good at protecting this stuff. It's deep in our culture, we've done it for a long time, and we'll continue to do so. But also, in this map, what we see is literally millions of people over hundreds of years taking action through grassroots organisations, on their balconies, in their gardens, on their rooftops, to create one of the greenest cities in the world for its size. And the result is we have places like Richmond Great Park, which is a national nature reserve. We have one of my favourite views of London, looking across Crystal Palace, through Sydenham Woods, through Dulwich Woods, to the Horniman Museum, through Nunhead Cemetery, this incredible chain of the old Great North Wood that has been protected and will be protected for people in the future. By international standards, on the right of the image here, you've got Canary Wharf with some of the highest property prices in the world. If this was Tokyo or New York, many other cities, then Mudchute City Farm, which is there, all that would be high-rise, wouldn't it, I think? But instead there's like llamas and sheep, and actually a lot of social housing around that site as well, all stuff to be proud of. But for me, the places where most people have agency are actually in people's gardens and balconies. From a nature conservation perspective, this is the bit that excites me most. There are 3.8 million gardens in London, covering a quarter of the city, but actually half of those gardens now paved over. But if you think about it, it will only take 5 years, maybe, of people reading magazines. I'm thinking about. This was a piece that Creature Media put in about me and the National Park City campaign, which is great in that Geo Kids magazine. But it'll only take a bit of messaging. Think about the recycling agenda and energy agenda, actually for people to start saying, do you know what? We really want our gardens to be wilder or better for wildlife rather than being concrete or ecological desert. To shift the aesthetic away from this quite alienating idea that your garden has to either be prim or concrete to be looked invested. And actually maybe an invested garden is one that looks neglected, but actually is what we need in terms of what the world needs. So the result is we have all kinds of wildlife in London. Like I say, 15,000 species. We have foxes. My heart always skips a beat whenever I see a fox. We've got badgers, we've got hedgehogs that are doing better in cities than the surrounding countryside. We've got every type of reptile and amphibian, bar one, within the M25 area. We need to love insects far more and put plants out. And when you see your plants are being eaten by insects, celebrate that. It's just so cool. And when you see a weed, love that weed, and suddenly it's no longer a weed because a weed is just a plant that's in the wrong place. We need to embrace weeds. Ivy, get into ivy. It's quite hard on the horizontal space to negotiate that with people on streets. Imagine the optics, you're looking down the streets and every other house being covered in ivy, right? Great for sparrows, warms your house in the wintertime, cools it in the summertime, and actually protects your house from the elements. All those stories about it breaking up houses, it only breaks up houses that are already broken, right? So we should completely love ivy. And a lot of that wildlife's there, even though we're not necessarily particularly hospitable. So imagine if we were far more inviting. And the city isn't just great for wildlife, actually it's pretty awesome for open air recreation as well. So people often really think of it this way, but actually because cities are so connected and so porous and so inclusive, especially in a city like London, which is so well connected, there are more people out walking and running and cycling in London than anywhere else in the UK. And it's not just, like I say, because of the numbers of people in the city, it's also because of the assets the city has. So London by numbers is a really, really impressive place, right? You've got 4 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, now 3 National Nature Reserves, you've got as many trees as people. But for me, a national park is about 2 things, right? It's partially about celebrating everything that's been done in a landscape to get it to that point, whether it's Yellowstone or whether it's Glacier National Park or wherever it might be, or Death Valley. But it's also about recognising problems. The reason why national parks were created in the first place wasn't because everything was great and we're going to pat ourselves on the back and it's just a bit of greenwash, right? They're there because you need a combination of policy and grassroots action and community action and partnership to create a community to protect a place. That's what a national park is really about. So actually, when you think of London, we face a number of really significant challenges, okay? In my longer version of the presentation, I spend 20 minutes slamming London now, but I'm just going to sort of shorten it down. 1 in 6 children hasn't played outside in the green space with their parents at all in the last year. 5 in 6 have. A lot play football every week, a lot do all that, but 1 in 6 hasn't. That's a big cost to their childhood development, cost maybe to the whole of their lives, and a significant cost to the NHS in terms of mental health and well-being. 100,000 homes at risk of flooding, 1 in 10 species at risk of extinction. I could carry on, right? We're aware of 10,000 people dying of air pollution every year, right? So we're aware of all these threats. Many of us are aware of these different crises that we face. But actually, within London, we have actually all the solutions, all the talent, all the ideas, all the expertise that we need to be the change that we want to see. We have all that. But what it's not at the moment is catalysed or joined up. So the idea of could London become a national park? This is a bit of a radical idea to start with. I think actually the research and evidence and people's mindsets have shifted over the course of the campaign. That means that it kind of arrived at just the right time. I think if we asked this question a few years earlier, I don't think we would have had so much success. But it started off as a provocation where we just started saying, like London is a national park with an asterisk, and we said officially it's only a notional park, and we created a website that was better than a national park website. It was a guide to London as a national park. And Natural England, the government didn't have a go at us because they just thought it was officially only a notional park. But as a geographer interested in place and psychology, it's quite funny because even a real national park is only a notion, right? It's just there's some policy and law behind it. So we managed to play with that and started doing some subversive things and then creating maps. And then we worked with 100 students from Queen Mary University of London who presented London as a national park city, making these posters for every borough in London as it being like what a national park is, so that the Mayor of London had to walk past this like every day for 2 weeks, the City of London, along with the London Assembly. That got us into the Independent, and off the back of that we started holding workshops, events at South Bank, and we crowdfunded and created a proposal in which we said we don't want London to be a national park, but we want to be a national park city, so we can, rather than be designated from government straight down, we can declare it from the grassroots up. And so that we get the support of over 1,000 local politicians, the London Assembly and the Mayor, that would be our mandate. Easy, right? And when you look at national parks around the world, there are urban national parks which are inside cities and beside cities. But the innovation here is we're saying the entire conurbation is included, right? All of the city, everything in the city. And as well as that, unlike a traditional national park, there are no hard boundaries. Because water, wind, rain, walkers, swallows, swifts, they don't recognise hard boundaries, so why should we? So it's more about the self-identification. It's a bit more like gender or sexuality. If you want to be part of this, you can, but everyone within that landscape is included. We've had literally thousands of people support the campaign by coming to events, or offering ideas, or providing money. And we've got a network now of 280 I think, organisations within our network, which ranges from small community groups who like leopard slugs, and leopard slugs are those slugs that eat other slugs. So if you don't like slugs, keep leopard slugs and they'll eat the other slugs. And big international companies, and that's just a map of where we've had some of our political support. So the London National Park City, really crucially, is a place, just like a rural national park, you can explore, you can enjoy, you can improve upon, you can ruin. It's a vision that you can share, and just like a rural national park, it's a community of people working to look after that place. And in the UK, we're sort of very fixed in some of our ideas about what a national park is. In the US, they have national parks which are super top-down. They have like rangers with guns, and they have federal government own the land. They tell you what you can or cannot do. In the UK, we've got about 400,000 people that live in our national parks, and they're delivered by partnership. Elsewhere in the world, there are national parks where it's indigenous people who, supported by policy, are recognised as the people to deliver on the benefits of that landscape. So in Australia, Brazil, Canada, there is indigenous people looking after those locations. So if you think about what indigenous people do, right, they share stories, knowledge, seeds, power to look after that location. So for a London National Park City, yes, it's about top-down mayoral and council policy. Yes, it's about working in partnership with businesses, but it's also about recognising that all of us have the power to share seeds and skills and stories to look after the city as well. And that movement is about making the city greener, healthier, wilder, by getting outdoors more, creating a new identity for London and Londoners. It's based on our ecological and environmental heritage, as well as our cultural and financial heritage. And the National Park City Foundation is a small charity that we've set up to help make it a success. So in this vision, people are the solution, not the problem. It's landscape-centred, so everyone in that landscape is included. It's culturally driven, right? It's the makers, the storytellers, the artists. It's the magazines, the publications that will drive that energy and the positivity that is needed to make this work. And storytelling is absolutely at the key of that. The story of the National Park City and weaving that idea through the heart of the city is fundamental to its success. So I think, I'm not sure I'm doing time. I'm just going to whiz through our theory of change a little bit. So our theory of change really is underpinned by just two really simple questions, okay? The first one is what if, okay? At the beginning we said, what if we made London a national park, and what might the effects be on health, well-being, wildlife? But you think about that question, what if, and it's about ideation, it's about imagination, it's about dreaming. And I think sets the backdrop, sets the context of the National Park City. I begin to ask questions, and lots of people ask questions. So for example, how much over am I? Am I over? Am I okay? 5 minutes? 10 minutes. 10 minutes, fine, great, perfect. So, the question like, what if? So what if we had more stand-up paddle boarding in our canals? Like, people are never on our canals in London. What if those people who were stand-up paddle boarding got so angry that they got ill when they fell in the canal, that they cleaned up the canal, so you go swimming in the canal, and then you had otters in the canal because, like, the canals are clean enough for otters? And what if all children who went to school in London not only learned more about the environment, but explored, played, and learned outdoors every day as part of their everyday life? Like, what if that happened? What if streets were 10 times greener? What if everyone had a hole in their fence for a hedgehog? All this kind of stuff. And then you go into a why not space, right? Which is kind of reaching a tipping balance where you get to a critical mass of 3-4% of people saying, well, why not? And you think that if you go back maybe 40 years, 30 years, and you went to a school, there was a certain point where parents were sort of saying, well, what if my child could go to school and have a good maths lesson? And what if my child could go to school and not get hit by a ruler when they're like talking in class, you know? And at a certain point, enough parents got together to say, like, what do you mean? Like, they're in a school that should be caring for kids. Why don't I have good maths lessons? And why are you hitting my child, right? And you only have to have 3 or 4 noisy parents to start asking that. So you can imagine equally residents getting around a canal and going, why can't I swim in my canal, right? What is going on there? Where are the otters? Why isn't there outstanding outdoor play and learning taking place in my school every day? I think that what the National Park City idea does is, regardless of whether or not you agree with our charity or what other people are saying about it, it equips people with a conversation, a story around asking the question, and then contesting politicians or getting together as communities to say, why not? Why don't we do this? So just some fun things around that, okay? So what if every new build, every old build had holes in their walls and fences for hedgehogs? What if people closed streets so that toads could cross them without getting run over? What if more streets had street art? This is ATM, a street artist who paints endangered wildlife up in around the place, to inspire people to think about their relationship with nature. There's a great project in Walthamstow called 1,000 Swifts, where they got people to make recycled swifts all over Walthamstow to connect people to the new wetland centre. And actually sometimes those cultural provocations are much easier than like a greening provocation, which is harder. What if we had more library boxes and seed exchanges on street corners? What if more people invaded their streetscape with plant pots? What if people did everything they could to make residential homes as good as possible for wildlife? Not just retrofitting Victoria's terrace housing, but what if there were policies that insisted on all new builds having to have these things built into them? This is a project I was involved with Friends of the Earth around creating a postcode gardener and making a street 10 times greener in Hackney. But what if every street got together to make their street 10 times greener? And the interesting here is that I think that probably 80% of people who came out in this project weren't really interested in greening. They just wanted to meet their neighbours, right? And that's why I think the cultural piece is really important on this. And this is WATM, an architect firm, reimagining Fleet Street. And some of this stuff begins to sound fantastical, right? Some of this sort of stuff. But like I said before, some of the examples already exist in the cities. This is like a fort that's down by Horse Guards in St James's Park. This is Russian ivy, which in the autumn goes like fiery, like orange and red. It's pretty bonkers and awesome. Imagine if looking down a street, even if you've got a concrete street with cars on it, I think we'll lose cars at some point in the future. What if looking down that street, it was ferociously green like that? And for me, the National Park City isn't just about the green space, it's about all outdoor heritage and culture. So for me, parkour and free running, right, is about trespass. It's about testing what you can and cannot do in the city. It's about climbing. So for me, in many ways, that speaks to the history of national parks in the UK. But Farrell's, the architects, designed this for us. This idea of a vertical common, where you quite often see skyscrapers with no windows on one side. Well, what if they were turned into climbing walls, and if when you fall and die, it's your fault, just like in the countryside? Like, why not? I live in West London, where it's really quite flat. I live in Hanwell in West London, and I'm just desperate for there to be more hills like this one that was created. Why not have more hillocks that are intentionally created so people can see the city, feel more connected to it? South Londoners and North Londoners don't have this problem, but West Londoners. What if we could see more of the city so we felt more connected to it? And then in the winter time, there'd be somewhere to go sledging, and in the summertime, you got somewhere to go running as well. We said, what if we could make a map of London so people began to imagine it as a landscape rather than just as a city? And Charlie Peel, who's an amazing designer, who's based in Hackney, volunteered for 600 hours to make us a map the size of an OS map. It's a metre squared that shows all of London's green spaces and footpaths and how it all connects up, which has been an amazing catalyst for the campaign. What if we could shift mayoral policy? And we have, with the mayor agreeing this target and making the majority of London green. And this story has slowly been woven through social media, through stories, through great partnerships with Time Out. You guys have been absolutely brilliant as well. And very soon we're releasing in the next sort of week a crowdfunded paper around 12 ways to make life better in London and beyond. And what you'll see about a lot of these things, they're positive things that are about self, right? About being active, connecting, taking notice. But then when we get to the end, we are talking about taking climate action and those kinds of things as well. But it's about giving people the ideas of things that are already happening in parts of London and saying, well, what if you did this Swifts project or this Ivy project where you are? So 9 in 10 Londoners spot our aims. according to a YouGov poll. We're kind of amazed, surprised by this, but 1 in 20 apparently have contributed to the campaign somehow. Do a tweet, petition, coming to an event or something like that. So after all that work, on Monday, the Mayor of London, incredibly Natural England, which is the government agency that actually does do that top-down designation, and a range of experts around the world have been signing a charter for the London National Park City, and it will be coming into existence, which is super cool. That happens on Monday. Then throughout next week, there's the first National Park City Festival. You might have seen it in Tomac yesterday. It's being sponsored by the Mayor, and there are about 300 events taking place across London. Lego are doing a great event at City Hall around making like animals, and that's my animal impression. And beyond them, we're looking at programs around our makers or our volunteers, setting up informal groups where someone in a household or a street or a school, but like you do a green team, you could just set up a National Park City group. But unlike a green team where you do your recycling and then like what do you do next? Like you told people to turn off the lights. A National Park City group is also about greening, wilding, but also going on adventures, right? So you take that green team, you go on an adventure because that's good for you as well. And we're developing a program at the moment around National Park City Rangers, who are skills-based people who can help people to catalyse these ideas. And it's an idea that's spreading. So the Minister for Environment for South Australia wants Adelaide to be the next National Park City. This is secret at the moment, but on Monday it's been announced that leaders in Newcastle to be a National Park City. There's a campaign in Glasgow and Galway. And there are leaders at various levels of strata in various cities on most of the world's continents who are looking at London to see what happens next. So it's interesting to consider that actually a lot of the modern nature conservation efforts that you see around the world are honed in London. A lot of the practices around policy to protect spaces have been born from what has happened in London and the London region. And that 200 years after London catalysed the Industrial Revolution, what if we could all be part of something which helps to catalyse a new second green revolution? Thank you very much for your time.